Imagine driving through a major American city on a Tuesday afternoon and the streets are completely empty. The storefronts are dark, the buildings are vacant. This isn't some abandoned small town. These are major cities that once defined America, and they're turning into ghost towns right now. While everyone talks about booming tech hubs and growing Sunbelt cities, there's another story nobody wants to tell. 10 major American cities are hemorrhaging populations so fast that entire neighborhoods look like disaster zones. The decline is accelerating. What's happening is absolutely shocking. Let's count down from number 10. At number 10 is a city that will shock you. San Francisco, the tech capital of the world, is watching its population vanish before our eyes. Just 5 years ago, suggesting San Francisco would empty out seemed impossible. Today it's undeniable. The city, synonymous with innovation and wealth, is hemorrhaging residents at an alarming rate. The pandemic broke something fundamental in San Francisco that may never be repaired. When tech companies embraced remote work, highly paid workers realized they could live anywhere in the country, and thousands upon thousands chose anywhere but San Francisco. The numbers coming out of the city by the Bay are absolutely brutal. Office vacancy rates have exploded past 30% in the downtown core. Think about that for a moment. Nearly 1 in 3 office buildings sits empty. Walk through San Francisco's financial district on a weekday, and it feels post-apocalyptic. The streets that should be packed with workers commuting are eerily quiet. Retail corridors that once buzzed with activity throughout the day now sit empty and abandoned. Restaurants that depended on lunch crowds from office workers have closed permanently. Stores have shuttered. The commercial real estate market has completely collapsed. Property values have plummeted as owners desperately try to find any tenants. The cost of living in San Francisco became so astronomical that even people making 6-figure salaries couldn't justify staying anymore. A 1-bedroom apartment costs over $3,000 per month. A modest home sells for well over $1 million. Even wealthy tech workers are packing up and leaving. Then there's the homelessness crisis that has spiraled completely out of control over the past 5 years. What once shocked tourists has become the new normal for residents. Tent encampments line entire city blocks. Open drug use happens in broad daylight. The city government seems powerless to address the crisis effectively. The doom loop everyone warned about is no longer theoretical or some future possibility. It's happening in real time right now on the streets of San Francisco. Businesses leave, tax revenues decline, services get cut, more businesses leave. The cycle feeds on itself and accelerates with each passing quarter. Major tech companies that built their empires in San Francisco are now abandoning the city. They're moving headquarters to Austin, Miami, and other cities with lower costs. Each departure takes hundreds of jobs and millions in tax revenue. The brain drain from San Francisco is reaching catastrophic levels right now. San Francisco went from being the city everyone wanted to move to the city everyone wants to escape from. The transformation happened in just 5 years. If a global tech capital can collapse this quickly, no city in America is truly safe from rapid decline. San Francisco proves how fast things can unravel. Coming in at number 9 is Detroit, the city that literally wrote the playbook on American urban decline decades ago. And here's the devastating truth. It's still adding new chapters to that playbook today. Yes, there's been some investment downtown. Yes, some young professionals moved into trendy lofts. But that's a tiny sliver of reality. Step outside those carefully curated downtown zones and you'll see the real Detroit that most people experience. Entire neighborhoods look like they've been abandoned for decades. Because they actually have been. Detroit's population peaked at 1.8 million people back in 1950. Today it struggles to maintain 650,000 residents. Let that sink in for a moment. Detroit lost nearly 2/3 of its entire population over 70 years. That's not a decline or a downturn, that's a complete and total collapse of a major American city. Blocks upon blocks of homes have been demolished by the city, leaving literal urban prairies where thriving communities once existed. Drive through neighborhoods on Detroit's east side and you'll see streets where only 1 or 2 houses remain occupied on entire blocks. The rest are either demolished or boarded up and abandoned. Grass grows through cracked driveways. Trees sprout from collapsed roofs. Nature is reclaiming what humans built and then abandoned. The tax base shriveled so dramatically that the city can't afford to maintain basic services across its vast geographic footprint. Streetlights don't work in many neighborhoods. Roads are full of potholes that never get fixed. Emergency response times stretch to dangerous lengths. The infrastructure is literally crumbling beneath residents' feet. Detroit declared bankruptcy in 2013, the largest municipal bankruptcy in American history. A decade later, the city is technically out of bankruptcy, but the fundamental problems remain completely unsolved. Population continues declining, tax revenue continues shrinking, the services residents need continue deteriorating year after year after year. Despite all the comeback stories in the media about downtown Detroit, the overall trajectory remains stubbornly downward. The revitalized area's benefit maybe 5,000 people. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands still live in declining neighborhoods that see no investment whatsoever. The tale of two cities grows more extreme with each passing year. Young people who grow up in Detroit almost universally plan to leave as soon as they possibly can. They go to college elsewhere and never return. The brain drain is absolutely catastrophic for any hope of future revival. Without young talent, without energy and innovation, Detroit continues its slow march toward becoming a true ghost town. The auto industry collapse that triggered Detroit's initial decline happened decades ago, but the consequences keep rippling forward through time like waves from a stone dropped in still water. Each generation inherits a worse version of the city than their parents knew. The decline compounds across generations with no end in sight. Detroit stands as a warning to every other American city about what happens when you depend too heavily on one industry. When that industry fails, the entire city fails with it. The lesson was supposed to be learned, yet we watch other cities making the same mistakes, setting themselves up for Detroit's fate. Number 8 is Baltimore, and this statistic will absolutely blow your mind when you hear it. Baltimore has been losing population not just for years or even decades, but for 7 consecutive decades without interruption. 70 years of continuous decline. Let that truly sink in. The city that once housed 950,000 people now barely holds on to 570,000. Drive through East Baltimore or West Baltimore today, and you'll understand immediately why people are fleeing. Thousands upon thousands of abandoned row houses line street after street after street. Many are still structurally sound buildings, but they're left to rot because nobody wants to live in those neighborhoods anymore. The Inner Harbor area might look nice and revitalized for tourists who visit for a weekend, but venture just a few blocks in any direction from that tourist zone, and reality hits you like a freight train. Communities that have been left behind for generations. Neighborhoods where hope died a long time ago. Crime in Baltimore remains stubbornly high year after year with no meaningful improvement despite various initiatives. The murder rate per capita consistently ranks among the highest in the entire nation. Parents simply won't raise children in environments where violence is a daily reality. Families who have any means to leave do exactly that. The port industry that once drove Baltimore's entire economy has diminished dramatically over the decades. Container shipping moved to larger facilities elsewhere. The jobs that sustained generations of Baltimore families vanished. Nothing replaced them at anywhere near the same scale of employment or wages. The economic foundation crumbled away. Young people who grow up in Baltimore don't dream of staying and building lives there. They dream of leaving and never coming back. That's perhaps the most devastating indictment of any city. When your own children want nothing more than to escape, what future does that city possibly have? The school system in Baltimore struggles constantly with funding, performance, and basic functionality. Schools that should be preparing the next generation for success are failing at fundamental levels. Without quality education, the cycle of poverty continues. Without breaking that cycle, Baltimore has no path forward to better days. 70 years of continuous population decline means that multiple generations of Baltimore residents have only known a city getting worse. They've never experienced improvement or growth or hope. When decline becomes the only reality people know, it becomes impossible to imagine things could ever be different or better. The abandoned row houses throughout Baltimore represent billions of dollars in lost property value and lost potential. These could house families. Instead, they rot empty while the city struggles with homelessness. The dysfunction is visible on every block. The contradiction is impossible to miss or explain away. Baltimore had every advantage a city could want. A major port, proximity to Washington, D.C., historic significance, cultural institutions, yet it squandered all those advantages through decades of mismanagement, corruption, and decline. The city serves as a case study in how not to manage urban challenges and change. At number 7, we find Cleveland, the ultimate poster child for Rust Belt decline across the entire Midwest region. This city lost more than half its peak population and shows absolutely no signs whatsoever of reversing course. The factories that once employed hundreds of thousands of workers have either shut down completely or moved operations overseas. Sure, the waterfront has a nice baseball stadium and a rock and roll museum that attract tourists for weekend visits, But drive just 10 minutes in any direction from that waterfront, and you'll see the real Cleveland that residents live with every single day. The Cleveland that never makes it into tourism brochures or redevelopment announcements. Abandoned industrial buildings with broken windows dot the landscape like tombstones, marking where prosperity once existed. These massive structures once hummed with activity around the clock. Thousands of workers streamed through their gates every shift change. Now they sit silent and empty, slowly decaying as weather and time take their toll. Neighborhoods where half the houses sit completely empty have become common throughout Cleveland. On some blocks, only 2 or 3 homes remain occupied. The rest are boarded up or demolished. Residents who remain live on streets that feel abandoned and isolated. The sense of community that once existed has evaporated. The aging infrastructure throughout Cleveland is crumbling because there's simply no money available to maintain or replace it. Roads are full of potholes. Water mains burst regularly. The sewer system dates back a century in many areas. The shrinking tax base cannot possibly afford the billions needed for proper infrastructure investment. Young people who could potentially revitalize Cleveland keep leaving for opportunities in growing cities with brighter futures. This creates a vicious cycle that becomes self-reinforcing. Fewer young people means an aging population. Aging population means declining tax revenue. Declining revenue means worse services. Worse services mean more people leave. Cleveland's population continues trending downward year after year with no floor in sight. Every census brings worse numbers. Every population estimate shows more losses. At what point does a city shrink so much that it can no longer function as a major urban center? Cleveland may be approaching that threshold. The brain drain from Cleveland is particularly devastating for any hope of recovery. College graduates leave immediately after getting their degrees. They take their education, energy, and potential to cities that offer better opportunities. What's left behind is a city that keeps losing its most valuable human capital year after year. Manufacturing jobs that paid middle-class wages for people without college degrees are gone forever. They're not coming back to Cleveland or anywhere else in the Rust Belt. Service jobs that replace them pay far less and offer no path to prosperity. The economic foundation that built Cleveland no longer exists. Cleveland represents the fate of dozens of similar Midwest cities built on manufacturing that collapsed. The story repeats across the region with minor variations. Cities that thrived when factories ran are dying now that factories are gone. The entire regional economy never successfully transitioned to the modern era. Number 6 brings us to St. Louis, and these numbers are absolutely staggering when you see them laid out. The city peaked at 850,000 residents in 1950. Today it has plummeted to around 280,000. Read that again slowly. St. Louis lost more than 2/3 of its entire population. St. Louis holds a dubious distinction that should horrify everyone who cares about American cities. It has lost residents every single census since 1950 without exception. That's over 70 years of uninterrupted decline spanning multiple generations. No reversal, no stabilization, just continuous hemorrhaging of population year after year after year. The crime rate in St. Louis regularly ranks among the absolute worst in the entire nation. The murder rate per capita is terrifying. Violent crime affects neighborhoods throughout the city. People don't feel safe in their own communities. When safety disappears, everything else becomes secondary. Families flee to suburbs or other states entirely. Racial segregation in St. Louis created deep divides that never healed over the decades. The city remains starkly divided by race and class. Different communities view each other with suspicion and hostility. Without social cohesion, the collective action needed to address problems becomes impossible. The city stays fractured and dysfunctional. Urban sprawl pulled the middle class to distant suburbs throughout the 20th century, leaving the city proper to slowly wither and die. People with resources moved beyond city limits. They took their tax dollars with them. The city lost revenue while still needing to maintain infrastructure built for 3 times as many people. Entire neighborhoods north of downtown St. Louis look like they've been hit by bombs or natural disasters. On some blocks, abandoned buildings actually outnumber occupied ones. Vacant lots filled with rubble and weeds stretch for blocks. The scale of abandonment is shocking even for people who've seen urban decline elsewhere. The tax base in St. Louis collapsed so dramatically that the city struggles to provide even basic services to remaining residents. Trash pickup is irregular, street maintenance is minimal. The city government is essentially in a managed decline, doing just enough to prevent complete failure but unable to invest in any meaningful improvements. St. Louis had enormous advantages that should have prevented this level of decline. a central location, the Gateway Arch as an iconic symbol, major corporations headquartered there, sports teams, universities, yet none of it mattered in the face of decades of mismanagement and the fundamental economic shifts reshaping America. Young professionals who could potentially turn St. Louis around take one look at the crime statistics and quality of life issues and choose to build their careers elsewhere. The city can't attract the talent it needs for revival. Without that talent, revival becomes impossible. It's a trap with no obvious escape. When a city loses 2/3 of its population over 70 years, at some point you have to ask whether revival is even possible anymore. Maybe St. Louis reached a tipping point where decline became irreversible. Maybe the city's future is simply continued shrinkage until it stabilizes at some much smaller size, if it stabilizes at all. At number 5 is Pittsburgh, the steel city that's been rusting away for decades as its namesake industry collapsed. During its industrial heyday, Pittsburgh was home to over 670,000 people. Today it struggles to maintain 300,000 residents. Yes, they tried rebranding as a tech hub called Roboburg. The population numbers reveal the truth. Entire hillside neighborhoods throughout Pittsburgh sit empty today, their narrow streets lined with houses nobody wants to buy, even at rock-bottom prices. The topography that once seemed charming now traps declining neighborhoods. Getting anywhere requires driving up and down steep hills. The geography itself works against revitalization efforts. The steel mills that built Pittsburgh and made it prosperous are gone forever. They've been replaced by empty lots, remediated brownfields, and desperate attempts to find new economic purposes for industrial land. The transition from manufacturing to whatever comes next has been painful, slow, and largely unsuccessful. The population in Pittsburgh skews dramatically older because young people consistently leave for opportunities in other cities. Even graduates from Pittsburgh's own universities tend to leave immediately after getting their degrees. They head to bigger, growing cities where the future feels brighter and opportunities feel more abundant. Pittsburgh has strong universities doing world-class research. It has cultural institutions. It has affordable housing compared to many cities. Yet none of that translates into actually retaining young talent. The lifestyle factors that young professionals care about apparently aren't enough to overcome whatever Pittsburgh lacks in their eyes. The city has made genuine efforts at reinvention with some success in attracting tech companies and startups. Downtown has seen investment. Certain neighborhoods have gentrified, but these successes impact tiny fractions of the city. The overall trajectory remains downward, as most neighborhoods continue declining and population keeps shrinking. Infrastructure throughout Pittsburgh is aging and inadequate for modern needs. The city's famous bridges require constant maintenance and periodic closures for repairs. The street grid struggles with contemporary traffic patterns. Water and sewer systems date back generations. Everything needs replacement, but the money simply doesn't exist. Pittsburgh demonstrates how reputation and perception matter as much as reality. Even if the city makes improvements, if people still perceive it as a declining Rust Belt city, they won't move there. Changing perception takes decades. Pittsburgh doesn't have decades to wait while population continues draining away year after year. The weather in Pittsburgh doesn't help its case. Cold winters, gray skies much of the year. When competing for residents against Sunbelt cities with warmth and sunshine year-round, Pittsburgh faces a fundamental disadvantage. Climate and weather increasingly drive where people choose to live in the age of remote work. Pittsburgh represents the fate of numerous cities across the Rust Belt that were built on industries that no longer exist in America. The question isn't whether they can return to past glory, because they clearly can't. The question is whether they can find new identities and purposes before they shrink below viable thresholds. Number 4 might genuinely surprise you because it doesn't get much attention in national discussions about urban decline. Milwaukee is the often overlooked Midwest city that's been quietly hemorrhaging residents since the 1960s. It dropped from 740,000 people to around 560,000, and the decline continues steadily year after year. The manufacturing jobs that built Milwaukee's middle class have completely vanished over the past 50 years. They left behind struggling communities and shuttered factories that sit rusting throughout the city. The economic foundation that made Milwaukee prosperous doesn't exist anymore. Nothing has successfully replaced it at any comparable scale. Milwaukee is one of the most segregated cities in all of America, with stark divisions by race. Different communities live in completely separate worlds. The segregation creates deep divisions that have never been addressed or healed. Without social cohesion, collective action to solve problems becomes nearly impossible. The school system in Milwaukee struggles constantly with funding shortfalls and performance problems. Test scores lag, graduation rates disappoint. Families who care about their children's education leave Milwaukee for suburbs with better schools. This brain drain ensures that the next generation will be even less equipped to reverse decline. Neighborhoods throughout Milwaukee decline block by block in slow motion. Houses fall into disrepair. Businesses close. Property values drop. Families who can afford to leave do exactly that. Those who remain often lack the resources to maintain properties properly. The visible decay accelerates as each year passes. Milwaukee doesn't make dramatic headlines like some other declining cities. There's no single catastrophic event to point to. It's just a slow, steady bleed of population and economic vitality that's continued for 60 years. The gradual nature makes it less visible, but no less fatal to the city's long-term survival. Crime in Milwaukee has risen in recent years, adding to the quality of life concerns driving people away. While not as severe as some other cities on this list, the perception of increasing danger affects decisions about where to live. Once crime crosses certain thresholds, it triggers tipping points where exodus accelerates. Milwaukee's location and climate work against it in the competition for residents. Cold winters drag on for months. The Great Lakes location means lake-effect snow. When people can work remotely from anywhere, why would they choose Milwaukee's weather over warm Sunbelt alternatives? The climate disadvantage grows more significant every year. The state's relationship with Milwaukee creates additional challenges. State government in Madison often seems indifferent or actively hostile to Milwaukee's needs. Funding formulas don't adequately support the city. State policies restrict Milwaukee's ability to address its own problems. The city fights uphill battles at every level of government. Milwaukee represents dozens of similar Midwest cities experiencing quiet decline that doesn't grab national attention. They're slowly dying while America focuses on more dramatic collapses elsewhere. But the end result is the same. These cities are becoming ghost towns in slow motion rather than rapid collapse. Coming in at number 3 is New Orleans, a city that Hurricane Katrina devastated in 2005. Here's what people don't realize or want to acknowledge. New Orleans never actually recovered from Katrina. Before the storm, the city had nearly 485,000 residents. Today, it's down to around 370,000. Some people evacuated because of Hurricane Katrina and simply never came back. They rebuilt their lives in Houston, Atlanta, or other cities where they evacuated. Their children grew up elsewhere, with no connection to New Orleans. Multiple generations of potential residents were lost when those families never returned after the storm. Others have left more recently, as climate change makes the threat of future disasters feel inevitable rather than possible. Another major hurricane could devastate New Orleans again. Rising sea levels threaten the entire city. The infrastructure protecting New Orleans from water might not withstand future storms. Living there feels increasingly risky. Insurance has become impossibly expensive in New Orleans or completely unavailable for many properties. Major insurance companies have pulled out of Louisiana entirely. When you can't get insurance, you can't get a mortgage. When you can't get mortgages, the housing market freezes. The insurance crisis alone makes the city unlivable for many. The infrastructure in New Orleans continues crumbling from decades of deferred maintenance that nobody can afford to properly address. The levee system needs constant upkeep and upgrades. The pumping stations that keep the city dry are aging. Streets flood regularly. The water and sewer systems date back generations and fail frequently. Crime in New Orleans remains persistently high, with violent crime affecting neighborhoods throughout the city. The police department is understaffed and struggles to maintain order. When combined with natural disaster risks, crime pushes even people who love the city to make the painful decision to leave for safer places. New Orleans has unique culture and history that exists nowhere else in America. The music, food, architecture, and traditions are irreplaceable, yet culture alone can't overcome the practical realities of climate risk, insurance problems, crime, and infrastructure failure. People are choosing survival and safety over culture and tradition. The sense that New Orleans is fighting a losing battle against the rising Gulf of Mexico hangs over every discussion about the city's future. The land is sinking, the seas are rising, the storms are intensifying. Eventually the math stops working. How long can you maintain a city in those conditions? Does New Orleans have decades or just years? Tourism keeps parts of New Orleans functioning, but tourism alone cannot sustain a city. The French Quarter might thrive on weekend visitors, but families need jobs, schools, safety, and infrastructure. Tourism dollars don't fix the fundamental problems driving residents away from neighborhoods far from Bourbon Street. New Orleans represents a new category of urban decline driven by climate change. Other cities decline due to economic shifts. New Orleans faces existential threats from nature itself. As climate change accelerates, more coastal cities will face similar dilemmas. New Orleans is the canary in the coal mine for climate-driven urban migration. At number 2, and this shocks most people, is Chicago. America's third-largest city is actually shrinking before our eyes in real time. Chicago has lost population for 6 consecutive years straight. It dropped more than 80,000 residents just since 2020. Let that truly sink in. One of America's most iconic cities is in free fall. While downtown Chicago still has some life and activity during business hours, vast stretches of the South Side and West Side look absolutely abandoned. Entire blocks of empty lots exist where family homes once stood. The contrast between downtown and neighborhoods is stark and growing more extreme with each passing year. People cite multiple reasons for leaving Chicago, and they all compound together. Violence and crime top the list. High taxes, brutal winters that seem endless, better job opportunities in Sunbelt cities, the high cost of living, dysfunctional city government. Any one factor might be tolerable. All of them together drive exodus. The violence in Chicago makes national headlines constantly with its devastating gun violence statistics. While most neighborhoods are safe, the perception of danger affects the entire city's reputation. Companies won't relocate there, families won't move there, tourists avoid it. Perception becomes reality regardless of statistical nuances. Major corporations are relocating their headquarters out of Chicago to other cities, taking thousands of high-paying jobs with them. Boeing left, Caterpillar left. Other companies are considering moves. Each departure removes tax revenue and employment. The departures signal to others that Chicago isn't the place to be anymore. The exodus from Chicago isn't just poor residents from struggling neighborhoods. It's middle-class families seeking better schools and safer communities. It's young professionals choosing warmer climates. It's retirees heading to states with lower taxes. Chicago is losing residents across every demographic group simultaneously. The hemorrhaging affects everyone. Illinois has among the highest tax burdens in America. Property taxes, state income taxes, sales taxes, all are significantly higher than competing states like Texas or Florida. When you can work remotely from anywhere, why pay Illinois taxes when you could live in a no-income tax state? Tens of thousands have done exactly that. Chicago's pension crisis creates a fiscal nightmare with no good solutions. The city owes billions in pension obligations to retired workers. Those obligations grow every year. Paying them requires raising taxes. Raising taxes drives more people away. The doom loop accelerates. Chicago is trapped in an impossible fiscal situation. The fact that Chicago, one of America's greatest cities with world-class museums, architecture, universities, and culture, cannot stop population decline reveals how serious the problems are. If Chicago can't reverse the trend, what hope do smaller, struggling cities have? Chicago's decline is a warning sign for urban America. Winter in Chicago lasts for months, with brutal cold, lake-effect snow, and gray skies. When people can work from anywhere, many choose places where winter means 70 degrees and sunshine. The climate disadvantage becomes impossible to overcome when competing for remote workers who have complete freedom of location choice. And finally, at number 1, we have Memphis, Tennessee. This city is experiencing perhaps the most dramatic combination of recent decline and urban decay of any major American city right now. Memphis has lost more than 5% of its population just since 2020 alone. It's one of the fastest shrinking cities in the entire nation. The statistics coming out of Memphis are genuinely grim and getting worse. It has the highest murder rate among all major U.S. cities. It ranks as the poorest big city in America. The poverty rate is staggering. The combination of extreme poverty and extreme violence creates conditions that are simply unlivable for anyone with any options. The school system in Memphis is failing its students at every level. Test scores are abysmal. Graduation rates are terrible. School buildings are literally falling apart from neglect. Parents who care about their children's education leave Memphis for any place with better schools. The brain drain dooms the next generation before they're even born. Businesses are fleeing from Memphis to the suburbs as fast as they possibly can. The suburban areas grow while the city proper hollows out. This creates a donut of decline where the urban core dies while outer areas expand. The city loses tax revenue while still needing to maintain infrastructure for its geographic footprint. Drive through North Memphis or South Memphis today, and you'll see block after block after block of empty homes, closed businesses with boarded windows, abandoned buildings slowly collapsing, a community that genuinely feels like it's given up hope. The visible decay is shocking even for people who've seen urban decline elsewhere. So what do all these declining cities have in common? The patterns are impossible to ignore once you see them clearly. Economic shifts destroyed foundations. Crime drives families away. Remote work enables exodus. Climate creates new risks. Quality of life determines choices. These cities face perfect storms of challenges, with no easy solutions. The simple fact is that these 10 cities are becoming ghost towns right now, as we speak. The data is absolutely clear. The trends are completely undeniable. Population decline accelerates. Tax bases shrink. Infrastructure crumbles. Services deteriorate. Each problem makes the others worse, in self-reinforcing cycles that seem impossible to break. Can these cities be saved? That's the question everyone wants answered. The honest truth is that some might stabilize at smaller sizes with the right policies and massive investments. Others might be too far gone, past tipping points where decline becomes irreversible. But one thing is absolutely certain based on current trajectories. Without dramatic changes in policy, economics, and priorities, these major American cities will continue their transformation into modern ghost towns. The cities that built America in the 20th century are dying in the 21st. Entire ways of life are disappearing. Communities are vanishing. History is being erased block by block. The ghost towns are getting emptier every single day. The question isn't whether decline is happening because the numbers prove it beyond doubt. The real question is whether America will let these cities die or find the will to save them before it's too late. Time is running out fast.